What impact will the presidential candidates have on financial reform?
Well, I think if you see President Obama reelected, you'll see a continued commitment to the full implementation of the Dodd-Frank law. That'll be his focus, certainly over the next 2 years. I think if Mitt Romney was to win, he would pause the Dodd-Frank regulatory environment, and he would re-examine many of the provisions that are still pending. So you might see Romney want to review all of the recent regulations that were put into effect under the Obama administration, and he would re-examine those and decide on a case-by-case basis whether to extend them or not.
Do you see regulatory agencies moving faster to push the regulation proposals?
I think that the regulatory agencies have been busy the last half of the year in particular trying to meet some deadlines and put as much of Dodd-Frank as they can in place. And that will continue through the end of the year regardless of who's elected. Might be a little quicker if Romney's elected in November. But I think for the most part, they can do what they can do. I mean, they've had a lot of mandates thrown at them, a lot of work to do in a short period of time. So they seem to be diligent at work, and we have seen an acceleration of work in that regard over the last couple months, and I suspect it'll continue through the end of the year.
How would you characterize the banking community's response to Dodd-Frank?
Well, I think the banking industry, whether it's small or large banks, are very interested in providing input and making sure that their voices are heard as the regulators seek to implement the different provisions. So there's really a lot at stake here. I mean, in some cases you're talking about some banks changing how they do things in a very substantial way. There's a lot of money involved in terms of changing their systems, getting ready for a new regulatory regime. So there's a lot of interest among the banks in making sure that their views are represented and put into the mix of those views that regulators will consider.
How is UBS looking at the legislative agenda?
The legislative activity that you see will be activity that probably won't go anywhere in terms of being enacted into law. In the lame duck session between the election and the end of the year, you'll see a lot of legislative activity that will relate primarily to the extension of the current tax rates, defense spending, and other cuts that are scheduled to be made at the end of the year. A lot of members will be trying to avert those. There won't be, in my view, a lot of financial services issues mixed in with those very high priority end of year issues that hopefully will be resolved.
Is there a possibility of a transaction tax in the financial markets?
I think in the U.S. there isn't sufficient support for it to be enacted in any way. Congress has talked about this issue for some time, but I don't think there's a majority of support to move it forward. However, I think it's always one of those issues that is going to be in play. As long as Europe tinkers with a transaction tax, whether it's France or other countries, it's always going to be listed on the range of possibilities that policymakers will look at. So it's always going to be an issue that will be around, but right now I just don't see there being enough support in Congress to move that forward in any meaningful way for the foreseeable future.
What is the impact of the extraterritorial reach of Dodd-Frank?
It's a very important issue to a bank like UBS, which operates in many, many markets and has to and tries to, well, certainly complies with all the different regulations in the countries in which we operate. Trying to get a standard, a universal standard, is something that we would like to achieve. And to the extent that the U.S. has now passed a law as comprehensive as Dodd-Frank, we do want to make sure that it doesn't conflict or compound any other regulatory challenge we have in any other market. So we do like the idea of regulatory parity and a regulatory standard that makes it more possible for us to operate in different markets.
As you speak with your colleagues in Europe, what are you seeing in terms of regulatory harmonization?
not all of the regulations that would require harmonization have been put into effect, so the jury is still out in terms of the level of harmony that we will see. But certainly there seems to be an acknowledgement that it's a challenge to banks like ours. And we've gotten commitments that that it's something that U.S. regulators and others are interested in achieving. So we feel good about the level of assurance we've gotten, but we'd feel even better once we see it into the law.